A big week for you. I want to ask you about the budget in a moment, but the breaking news today out of South Australia, this lockdown, very different approach to what we've seen from your government. What's your reaction to it?
Well, I think, Kieran, we've got to learn to live alongside the virus, and we don't want to be in a position where we're opening up and shutting down. Here in New South Wales, at the height of the restrictions we had in place early on, it was costing our economy about $1.4 billion every week, and as we've been able to lift those restrictions, it's now only costing around $400 million a week, but that's still a significant cost to people and to businesses. We want to keep as many businesses going, as many people in work during this period of time, and we haven't had any advice that you can eradicate this virus, and I think we've got to learn to live alongside it.
So, is South Australia, are other states paying the price for not having health systems up to the standard of New South Wales, where you've been able to do what the National Cabinet said was the aim, and that was to suppress the thing?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure of the situation of their own healthcare systems, but we've significantly invested in ours over a period of time. And during this pandemic, we announced in the budget yesterday, we've invested around $3 billion more. We've quadrupled our ICU capacity. So as this virus spreads, we're in a very strong position here to make sure that people get the healthcare they need to get through it. But it's not just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis. And I think people focus every single day on the new cases rather than actually looking at what are the downstream impacts on mental health, on the economy, on people being able to provide for their families. So there's really got to be a balance right across the country when it comes to our health and economic response. And I would say in many states it seems that there's 100% focus on health at the expense of people's livelihoods.
Well, a lockdown of this magnitude in a state run by a Liberal government, did you ever think you'd see that at the start of this thing when people were saying, OK, and the federal government, the National Cabinet said this is suppression, it's not eradication, and yet we're seeing this essentially a total lockdown for 6 days?
Well, the Prime Minister has said the strategy is suppression. We're following that strategy. Early on, at the start of the year, at the onset of the pandemic, there was obviously concern for our health system here in our state, and like many countries around the world and many state governments, sub-sovereign jurisdictions, we put restrictions in place to keep the virus at bay. But we've learned, over time, we've learned more about the virus. All jurisdictions have built up their health systems to be able to deal with it. But if there is no vaccine, I know that's been factored in, we can't be in a position in our country for years on years that we simply shut down our economies. And I think in South Australia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's only 2 new cases. It's not for me to be providing advice to South Australians, but I think as a nation, we've really got to open up and have we've invested in our health systems and work together in a way that keeps people in work, because going backwards and forwards is going to be incredibly disruptive for many businesses and ultimately livelihoods of Australians right across the country.
Are the chief health officers in some of the states, like South Australia and, well, Queensland as another WA, are they having too much sway, or is it, in your view, politicians being driven by the polls which show that the border closures, for example, are popular? People want to shut them.
Yeah, but you don't get into politics to be popular, particularly in a time of a pandemic. You've got to do what's in the state's and the nation's best interest. We saw that in the Queensland election when they were carrying out polling in relation to what people thought of the border restrictions between New South Wales and Queensland. The decisions of today that governments make will have significant consequences in decades to come. And we have an obligation to leave our state a better place than we found it. We had our meeting this morning, and we balance the health advice with the economic advice. Treasury working very closely with health to make sure we can open up our city and state in a very safe way. And there are robust discussions there, but ultimately as a cabinet we reach an agreement balancing both those interests. This is not just a health crisis. It may seem like that today, but if you saw the budget position yesterday as well, it's very quickly becoming an economic crisis too.
Well, we've certainly seen that the economic devastation in large parts of the nation, and that will obviously be a big problem for businesses in South Australia this week. Let's hope that they can deal with it and move on. But I want to talk about the budget, your budget this week. You've been saying there's reform needed, and you've taken a bold one with the stamp duty. It's going to be, well, basically, it's not going to be across the board now. People can choose either to pay stamp duty or, and the other option is a land tax, less obviously, but over a longer period, paid yearly. Explain to us the rationale behind that.
Well, stamp duty is a terrible tax, and we've had report after report, Kieran, that it impedes economic growth, jobs growth, and importantly, the opportunity for many people to get into the housing market. So in this budget, what we've done is we've taken that theory and put it into a model to consult with the community around one that the community supports to get people into housing. We've seen particularly young people over a substantial period of time now struggle to get into the property market, particularly here in Sydney. So we think providing a model that offers choice to people, they can tailor the circumstances to their need to their own circumstances, and we believe this model works for the people of our state. We want to consult on it. Obviously, it will cost the state government an amount of money as we conduct that transition, but we don't just have an opportunity right now to reform, we have an obligation to do it. Reform is hard, but we want to obviously work with the Commonwealth Government and other states as well to get these taxes that are inefficient, impede economic growth out of the way.
Well, stamp duty is the most inefficient because in terms of a number of reasons, isn't it, as you alluded to there, labour mobility, but also even things like people wanting to downsize, empty nesters and so on, saying, well, why would we if we're going to pay a massive whack at the start?
Well, mobility is a major issue, Kieran, and people don't live close to where they work because stamp duty provides that impediment of transferring properties and at the same time finding a home that suits people's purposes. The average time to save for stamp duty in 1990 was 1 year. It's now 2.5 years, and in that period of time, the price of a property has well exceeded the savings and the opportunity they had back at the beginning. So this provides, I think, a process where we can have a model in place that gives people choice and flexibility. They can purchase a home, one that suits them at the time, that suits their needs. And then they'll also get the benefit of the wealth creation off the back of that. And the more we can help people reach the great Australian dream, and particularly in Sydney where it's very difficult, we think it's a positive move. Reform is difficult, it's always a challenge, but we want to have this conversation with the community. You can't consult on theory, you need to actually get down to business and consult on a model, and we believe that this model will be in the state's interest and give many people right across the state a helping hand.
Treasurer, I'm speaking to you today from a beautiful part of the state, the Snowy Valleys region in Tumut, lovely town, and one of the things that the business community here told me today was that they want New South Wales government support in terms of infrastructure, and one of the things was the notion of an expanded and a proper road between Tumut and Canberra. They call it it's the Brindabella Road over the top of the mountains, but it would reduce that travel time to about an hour. And what the business people here are saying is that would make Tumut basically a dormitory or satellite suburb, would boost tourism and their economy, and they've been calling for it. It doesn't sound like it's a massive expenditure with a good return for the dollar. Is that something you will look at as part of your $300 million regional growth fund announced yesterday?
Well, certainly. I mean, that regional growth fund is there to provide much needed infrastructure to our regional towns. Wherever you live in our state, we want you to have the best access to services, healthcare, education, right across the board. So we will certainly look at that. Our infrastructure investment in this year's budget has gone up to now $107 billion over the next 4 years. And our road and transport budget alone exceeds the total infrastructure budget of any state across the country. And it's more important now than ever that we continue to build for the future because it will keep our economy moving. It's been driving economic growth in our state for some time. It supports around 150,000 jobs every single year. And ultimately, the end of this, I think it's going to be one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that if we can build now, keep people in working, we'll have great infrastructure off the back of it. So I'm more than happy to speak to the Deputy Premier, who would know that area very well, about looking at the feasibility of that infrastructure program. And if it makes sense and stacks up, we'll certainly look at it.
It certainly makes sense with Snowy Hydro 2.0 just up the road as well. But we appreciate your time, Treasurer. Thank you very much for that, Dominic Perrottet. A big week for you with the budget. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Kieran.